Hello and welcome to the second video regarding issue 3, which is the evaluation of the reasons for the economic crisis of 1929 and to 1933 in the USA 1918 to 1968 topic. And I was on playback in the last video. This title didn't come up. It started with the very first slide, so apologies for that. I could have, of course, redone the whole video, but that would have taken time away. I don't think it's massively important, given you would have picked it up from this bit here. So the last bit, finished on the last video, was to do with the factors. So introduce the idea of the factors. So the 5 factors are here once again. Obviously, you need to be aware that this is potentially a question that any of those factors could be asked about. So while, of course, it would be difficult to know everyone in significant detail, I would encourage you to know 3 of them quite a lot of detail and be able to write at least a little bit about the other 2. If you know more than that, the more you know, the stronger your chances are of being successful with this question. If it does come up, obviously just to remind you that this is issue 3, which does mirror the women issue in our British topic, which, as I've said many times, I don't write the paper, but it is one that I do think is due to come up for your exam. So if it does, obviously make sure that you are able to write an essay on this. So let's talk about the Republican government policies in the 1920s. America kind of comes out of the First World War in a very, very strong position. There was no fighting in America. It lost about 50,000 soldiers during the war itself. It has entered a kind of period of isolationism, but it is growing as a strong nation in the world, and after the First World War, it is the richest nation in the world. And one of the things in wartime, kind of similar to what happened in Britain, the government kind of took control of a lot of things to try and make sure that the war effort was run effectively and efficiently. And after that, as in Britain as well, the government wanted to try and return things to normal and to try and step away from the high level of control they would have had in wartime to letting people live with less government interference in peacetime. And the bit we're probably interested in this is more around how they did that for businesses and let businesses kind of just carry on and not quite do what they wanted, but certainly they were left with a very, very easy hand. So laissez-faire, it's a process we've met before, and in this case it's really to do with the running of the economy. It was felt by the American government, successive American governments in fact, that if they left the businesses alone to make their own decisions, the fact that they would make high profits, create more jobs, pay people more, and would be seen as a good thing. And actually, in the face of it, you could probably state that is the case, that actually the fact that they're employing lots of people and lots of people are getting paid good salaries from these businesses, therefore the businesses are making high profits and paying a bit more tax. That's all a kind of very, very good circle of positive things. But of course, we looked at the whole idea of boom and bust the last time in the introduction piece, and this is one of those things that kind of does start to hit America later on, because the businesses are essentially free to do what they want or be unregulated, which actually does turn out to be a policy that perhaps the government could have maybe been a bit tighter on. They tended to kind of leave the business alone to the point that there was corruption developing. So across various industries, there was price fixing that took place. Price fixing is basically where, if you go, for example, from supermarket to supermarket around Livingston, there's a fair chance you could get various goods cheaper in various places. But say, for example, all the supermarkets got together and decided that we're all going to charge the exact same price for everything. It means there's an opportunity for you to kind of get a bargain or any of those sort of things. And people are kind of getting charged a set amount for a lot of things, which means that the only winners are really the businesses, because they can set the price and all agree it, whereas the consumer doesn't have the opportunity to kind of get anything a bit cheaper, which therefore means maybe more of their salary is getting spent on something that actually should be cheaper, but the price has been kind of fixed for it. These are other kind of things that the government really let happen. So again, there was kind of set wages and people were being paid less. So there's a stat, because obviously stats are always very good. So child labour in textile mills in the south, 56-hour week, and wages not getting more than 18 cents an hour. Now, of course, 18 cents an hour, there are 100 cents in a dollar. And we need to remember this is the 1920s, where money is have significantly less value, but 18 cents an hour is still a very, very low amount of money. Also, at this time, a lot of people are starting to invest in the stock market, but they're investing in the stock market not through having their own money. When we talked about credit the last time, being able to kind of buy things that you didn't actually have to pay for straight away, a lot of shares at this time are being purchased on credit, which means while you are making a profit, that's not a problem at all. You can repay the money time and time again. But if the market collapses or if the market share prices fall, it means that people who potentially borrowed the money might not be able to pay it back, which becomes a big problem later on. We're going to meet some of the presidents now. So this is President Harding. So he was very sympathetic towards millionaires, I should say. And he and President Coolidge is the one who comes afterwards. Coolidge is the one who led the KKK to march down Pennsylvania Avenue. They are wealthy men themselves, and a lot of their cabinet, they're kind of the members of government, are wealthy too. So they are. It could be argued they're very, very much out of touch with the kind of common person, but also the people they are more in touch in is probably people like themselves, who have business ideas and how business should be run. And this basically means that the idea of having a fair way of operating things is really around the ideas on principles of a very, very small number of people. So there's Coolidge's one where he just talks about the fact how important business is. The chief business of the American people is business. And then Hoover, President Hoover, who the Hoovervilles that we met last time are named after him. So he's very much someone who doesn't see, very much a believer of laissez-faire. He's made all his money himself, so if he can be successful, his idea is, well, why can't other people be successful? They need to learn to stand on their own 2 feet, and the government isn't supposed to help them. Again, he talks about business being a very, very prominent thing. But when they speak of business, they're talking about big businesses, privately owned businesses, who are, again, very, very similar to themselves. Now, because the Republican Party, which is the party who's been in charge for all this time, are very strong in trying to help businesses develop, they started to reduce federal tax. So federal tax is basically the tax that a company pays on its profit. If this tax gets reduced, which we'll see it does there in 24, 26, and 28, this basically means that the businesses and people who work for them are getting more money, but it doesn't really trickle down to the poorer people. Now, the government had this idea that if we cut all these federal taxes, the money will get down to the poor people and everyone will be much better off. But actually, what tended to happen was government spending went down because the government weren't getting as much money as they were before. Businesses did have more money to expand, and consumers for a time did have more money to spend on goods. But that's not really what happened. As is often the case, when politicians make decisions that help richer people, what happens is the richer get richer and the poorer aren't really able to kind of keep up. So in a market where lots and lots of things are being produced, so remember we talked last time about the idea that how many TVs or vacuum cleaners or any of these kind of new products do you actually want or do you actually need? A lot of these goods are still being introduced, but a lot of people aren't actually able to buy them because they don't need them, or if they have one, they don't need to buy a second one, which means a lot of these goods are kind of just sitting there. So again, just some more figures to kind of show about how unbalanced things were starting to become. So 5% of the population are getting a third of the income of the country. 71% are getting less than $2,500 a year, which is what it's just kind of been decided the minimum people need to have to kind of live in comfort. So obviously we don't have a Booth and Rowntree in this country, but if you think about Rowntree's poverty line, this is kind of the 2,500 figure is the one that below that you'd maybe dip into poverty. But there we actually see quite a few people who actually are dipping into poverty, who are earning less than $1,000 a year, and the idea that the cars and all the new things coming off, they're not getting sold to them because they can't afford them. Now, tariffs, it's probably just to give you a bit of background on these. These are very much almost like taxes put in place on goods in various countries to try mainly to encourage people to buy the goods produced in that country. So if, for example, China imported a lot of goods into Britain, and the British government decided that in order to try and encourage people to buy British instead of buying things from China, they might charge a tariff of £10 on every good that you buy from China. So that might actually mean that Chinese goods in the end are quite expensive, but it means that more goods are being purchased at home or for homemade goods, which means people will probably be driven towards buying more of those, which means the companies who make them back in Britain will be able to produce more because the demand is more, and that in theory should work. However, in this case it didn't work, because what happened was that the Europeans who they put the tariffs on in place, so European goods coming into America to try and protect the American goods, they put these tariffs in place. But all that happened was when the American goods were getting exported to Europe, they just actually put the same tariffs in place on American goods, which meant that the huge amount of American goods that are being produced and sent to Europe are not getting sold, to the point that actually the demand for them drops off quite a lot, which means a lot of the companies who produce them are starting to struggle, which means that the American economy therefore starts to suffer because they don't need to produce as many goods as they have produced, and therefore jobs are starting to get lost. Hopefully all this is making sense. It can be quite complicated stuff, so I would encourage you to maybe just think about and maybe listen to some of these things a couple of times, and then of course come back and ask me questions if you're not too sure about it. Now, another challenge you had was in farming. So during the First World War, of course, farmers needed to grow as much as they could because food was becoming a little bit more scarce, and actually the fact that there was new technologies being invented meant that farming kind of increased very, very quickly, and the production increased very, very quickly. But it was a bit of a supply and demand thing, because there was so much farm goods that were produced that the farmers had to lower their prices in order to sell their goods. A lot of the kind of reason the food was needed as well was actually in Europe, because Europe was at war. So places like France and Germany and Belgium, places that weren't able to grow as much goods because they were at war, so they were importing a lot from America. But after the war, that wasn't required anymore because America started to recover. But the problem for the farmers was that they needed to cut their production to try and make prices a little bit higher, but they couldn't agree that they would all do. So Farmer X might say, yes, I will cut my production, but then Farmer Y would go, well, why should I cut my production? Which meant Farmer X would just keep their production going to the same level. So the market got saturated with farm produce, which meant that farmers weren't getting enough money to live on. A lot of their income dropped quite a lot. You'll see there that in 1929, a skilled manufacturing worker is getting $140, but a farm labourer is only earning $49 a month. And farms are starting to disappear. So there's a stat there again: 1 million less farms in 1930 than there were in 1920. And lots of farmers are going bankrupt because they just can't afford to live based on the amount of money they're getting from the produce that they are growing. And instead of all the farmers agreeing to take a step back to try and drive prices up, they just grew more and more. And eventually that the lack of demand from Europe drove a lot of them into bankruptcies. You'll see at the very bottom there's a stat of the 1920s, more than 600,000 farmers went bankrupt. So basically lost their farms and lost all their goods. And it kind of, again, they were stuck in that kind of cycle, not helped by the tariffs that were being imported, which meant that when their goods did get sent away, a lot of the time they weren't really selling the numbers that were needed, because the tariffs were making them more expensive, which meant less goods were ordered. And again, it's that kind of boom and bust cycle that they were kind of stuck in. So hopefully that all makes sense. It's a very kind of economically driven section, this kind of first factor, but what you'll hopefully find is that as the other factors kind of come out, you'll maybe find that it all kind of starts to slot into place a little bit. But of course, if you do have any questions on any of this at all, please make sure you ask me. You can email me or ask me on Teams, or if you actually ever meet again, you can ask me face to face. Anyway, hope this helps. If you have any feedback on it, please let me know. And there will be another video following very, very shortly. Thanks.